Our viewers, welcome to yet another episode of our lovely program, Personality Series. In today's episode, we come across an interesting personality, a Nigerian-Canadian professor who specializes in sociology, most especially researching in conflicts, Boko Haram, Niger Delta, and things like those. Professor Tope Oriola finished his first degree in Nigeria, then moved to Canada, studied at master's level and PhD, then started his career as postdoctoral fellow, and then moved to the United States as an assistant professor, then moved back to Canada and continued his career there. Now I would like to ask Professor Oriola to give a more proper introduction of himself.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kabir Yusuf. It's a great delight to be here, and thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the kindness that you continue to show. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the staff and members of the faculty that I've met so far. Well, I think you summed it up quite brilliantly. I left Nigeria in 2005 for my master's and PhD, and you've done an excellent job of mentioning the trajectory. So at the moment, I am joint editor-in-chief of African Security. African Security is an international peer-reviewed journal on security matters as they affect the African continent. And it is published by Taylor and Francis. Taylor and Francis is one of the world's leading academic publishers. It's been in operation, that organization has been in operation since 1852. And we're delighted to be part of this journal because it puts the discipline in focus, and we're able to review and publish some of the cutting-edge papers and manuscripts, both from scholars on the African continent and those outside the African continent. I am also pleased to say that I was recently voted Vice President of the Canadian Association of African Studies. My tenure began yesterday.
Wow.
The 1st of July. So I'm delighted about that, and also excited to see how we may work collaboratively with everyone over there in Canada, also here in Nigeria, on how to move the association forward. It's a new challenge. It's one that I have zero experience about, but I'm quite optimistic that we will do some good with the organization. I am delighted, to be in my home country, and it's always a great pleasure year after year to come. And as I was saying in your office just moments ago, I have been coming to Nigeria every year since 2014, and so of course there's always that process of relearning some certain things every time.
And unlearning maybe.
And unlearning perhaps, yeah. But it's great. It's great to be back, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
And thank you also for the wonderful introduction you have given to yourself. And I have quite a few number of areas that I want to delve into. First of all, I would like to ask you about your background and how your journey started from Nigeria, then moving to Canada. Then I would like to ask you about your experiences as a student in the diaspora, how you deal with life there, and then maybe from there we'll move into your academic career, and then there are many other issues that I want to discuss this afternoon. But let me start with the background. How did it all started from Nigeria studying undergrad and then moving to Canada?
Yeah, so I think growing up in Ogun State, I was born and raised in Ogun State. I think there was a level of expectation, and one would complete the bachelor's degree in Nigeria, and the UK was always I suppose, the destination of choice. That was, the focus. So I had thought at some point the UK would be where I would go for my graduate degrees. But before that, my father, you may or may not be aware of this, my father was in the Nigerian Army, served for over 30 years. And so there was this non-verbal expectation in the home that I would follow his footsteps and join the army and all of that. And in fact, I went into criminology very consciously, and the plan was to join the army. Obviously, I didn't quite join the army. I salute those who did, and doing an amazing job.
Did you change your mind, or what happened?
I didn't quite do that. I think I just never left school. I think that was sort of a decision by default. I just never left school, so just applying for this and that, and then the feeling among some of my professors that, we think we should join us, we think we should go into academics. That goes way back to my undergrad days back in Aduekiti and so on. And I had the privilege to have professors who were interested in my career, and the advice that I got was they thought that I should remain in academics. But in terms of going away for graduate studies and so forth, as I said earlier, the UK was the initial thought, but then I was introduced by one of my lecturers at the University of Aduekiti to someone who at the time was completing his PhD at McMaster University in Hamilton, Canberra. And he sent forms, application forms, and emailed me even long before I could send an email to him that, you fill out these forms, I'm going to take care of the application fees and so on and so forth. And just because, again, he was a friend to one of my lecturers, who was a very young man at the time. So this was how it began. And the reason I mentioned that, I guess, is to emphasize the role that mentoring plays. People taking an active interest in their students or people around them, younger folks in particular, to invest in them and mentor them and help them achieve their potentials. So that was how it began, and then thankfully the applications were successful. We made a decision as to what university to go. I finally decided that I would go to the University of Manitoba.
And then at this point, I would like to stop you. University of Manitoba, you've just told me a few moments ago that Manitoba is the coldest part of the coldest country in the world. Then suddenly it was Manitoba. Well, what happened?
Well, at the time I didn't know. but jokes apart, I think that I liked what I read about the school online. I did a bit of research. It was those days of overnight browsing.
I see.
Like now, and it's all much more democratized. Those days you had to go to one of the cyber cafes, and if you had a lot to do online, it was better to go overnight, which was what I did, and it just sounded like a good place to go. And as you would have experienced as a visiting scholar yourself at the University of Manitoba, you would have seen the camaraderie, the resources available, the facilities, the friendliness of people over there, to those who are new or aliens amongst them. And from Manitoba, I proceeded to the University of Alberta. Interestingly, Rossa, whom you know very well, Rossa Spandage, supervised my master's and was your host at the University of Manitoba. Encouraged me to go to Alberta, the University of Alberta, for my PhD. And I remember leaving Manitoba somewhat reluctantly because I loved Winnipeg, I loved Manitoba as well. I've also, of course, grown to love Alberta, but I remember initially just not wanting to move anymore. I haven't moved already. But it was a decision for which I think I'm eternally grateful. And completed my PhD, and then, as you mentioned earlier, I went for my postdoc, the Banting postdoctoral fellowship at the University of British Columbia, also in Canada. and subsequently proceeded to the University of Massachusetts, Boston, for my very first tenure track position after grad school. And I was privileged, and I am very much aware that teaching in the same department in which I got my PhD is a huge, huge privilege. I returned there in 2013 to take up a position in the faculty. So, in a nutshell, that's been the journey. There have been challenges, but I'm grateful to God for everything.
Speaking about challenges, going through your profile, one sees that you had a lot of opportunities because at some point in your life, you left two different opportunities to pursue others. Like there was a research you're part of, and you willingly withdrew from the research, and your position at Massachusetts, you left it willingly. What happened when people are talking about how difficult it is to come by a full-time position in the academia in North America, and you're leaving opportunities? What happened? Are you a kind of special kind of?
Well, I wish I could, accept the compliment, but you're right. I mean, the stats are relatively grim. Only 10 to 20% of North American produced PhDs ever find positions, full-time tenure track or tenure positions over there. It's incredibly competitive in a country such as Canada, in part because we're only about 36, 37 million people. California has a larger population than that. California has more universities than we do. California has over 100 universities. We have just one, or just under 100 universities. And when you consider that Canada produces anything from 6,000 to 7,000 PhDs every year, and then it means we are in fact producing more PhDs than can be absorbed within the system. So it's a demand and supply issue. And what that has meant over the years is that more and more Canadian-trained PhDs move to the United States for their first position, at least their first position. Most, in fact, end up staying permanently in the United States. I have friends who had to move to Australia, for instance. So, I mean, and over the years, having sat on hiring committees and so on, I think that anyone who has ever sat on an hiring committee over there would sometimes look at all the application packages and just wonder, also, how did I get my job? If it's so competitive. My position at UMass Boston, for instance, the chair of the department, someone in your role over here, told me they had over 100 applications for that position. So I don't I don't think anyone can honestly or sincerely claim that they know. I think we all just did our best. And for those who were people of faith, you hung on to your faith in God and hoped that something would open up for you, something that for which you were suited, and that in an uber competitive environment that somehow your application would stand out. But it was all, I don't think we all knew the outcome. I think we were just doing what we could do. We were all just putting in the efforts and just praying that those efforts would yield fruits.
Wow. That's, really a challenging situation. I would like you to speak to me about research. Leaving Nigeria, moving to that part of the world, North America, and finding yourself in the academia, but still doing most of your research about Nigeria, diaspora, Nigeria, your home country, and the idea of home in your mind. What's going on?
Yeah, what happens when I left Nigeria in December 2005, so it would be 14 years in a matter of months. It's a relatively long time. And I think what it means is that I have now spent more of my adult life outside Nigeria than inside Nigeria. But I remain in Nigeria, and I left in my mid-20s. And so my formative years were here. A lot, but not all, of my sensibilities are Nigerian, so that when I'm, I have to actively tell me, even when I'm shopping over there for anything, I have to actively not convert the dollars into naira when I buy things, because
I know what you're talking about.
you live there, you know what I'm talking about. So you have to actively recognize, okay, it's
okay,
dollars,
this is dollar.
Don't convert it into naira. So there is that. But home, when you stay away for that long, home becomes this transcendental enclave. It becomes, first and foremost, this construct in your mind that you build up, that you hang on to, the markers and identifiers of who you are, the embodiments of your identity. So the music, the food, the people, the language, and so things that you would ordinarily not bother about when you were home, they become things that are huge for you over there. So the songs you listen to, for instance, over the years, I found myself every time I come home buying CDs of songs that my father used to play when I was a kid.
Really?
And those are not necessarily, contemporary songs for my generation, but I find that I cling on to them because they remind me of where I'm coming from. They remind me of my background and all of that. So the diaspora is its own thing. It's because embedded within diaspora life is this sense of liminality. That you're here, but also there, but also not fully here and not fully there.
And where are you exactly?
So it has that in-betweenness, the peripatetichism, this middleness that you occupy, this space that you occupy. But it's also one that can be deeply enriching because you can see both worlds and hopefully enjoy both worlds. You see the inside of both worlds and take from here and take from there, and you become this cultural hybrid, essentially. I imagine that it would be different if I were born and raised there. It might be different. Mm-hmm. I'm eager to, see, from the experiences of those who were born there and only have stories and anecdotes from their parents about what it means to be born and raised in Nigeria. But I was born and raised here, so it's slightly different. So that my frame of reference is also partly Nigerian in many ways. The diaspora life, I think, has its unique challenges, but also its unique blessings. I recall as a first-year master's student in Manitoba, phoning my cousin, who now lives in the UK, telling him that, and he could sense the excitement in my voice. And I said, that he wouldn't believe how many books I had signed out from the library. And he said, how many? I said, over 100. And I almost screamed because I could not believe that one person could sign out 100 books. And the library hadn't run out of books. And there were hundreds of students who were doing the same. Such was the level of resources at your disposal. And the computer labs, and my favorite story would be a moment during my MA, again in Manitoba, at a room I'm sure you know very well, in the sociology department at the University of Manitoba. A bunch of us were, working on all kinds of projects. I think I was writing an essay for a class. And the power supply dimmed. It didn't go off completely, but it dimmed like it was going to go off. Everybody ran out, and I was wondering what was going on. Because for a Nigerian, that was not a big deal. I was 2-3 months away from Nigeria at the time, and they all ran out. Only one person or so came back in, and she sat beside me. And then she's still my friend on Facebook, by the way, a very dear friend. And she said, did you notice what happened? And I said, what? She said, they passed. I said, but it didn't go off. And she said, well, everybody was scared. Why were you not scared? And in my mind, I'm speaking Yoruba to myself, like, okay, so how do I explain to her that this is not a big deal where I come from?
I imagine that she has to understand either Hausa, Yoruba, or Igbo for her to understand
what it meant. So I gave the best explanation that I could, and it's not really a big deal. And I wasn't scared. In fact, there was at least one person amongst those who ran out who never went back to that room because she was traumatized by that.
Traumatized?
Yes. She never went back to that room until she graduated. So Yeah.
Wow.
So such moments remind you of certain things. Such moments also.
Okay, maybe you would have to speak, since you're speaking about being traumatized by a light going dim. You would have to speak to our audience about the process you have been through of being untraumatized from the Nigerian experience that you've taken with you to Canada. Like us, having been born and raised in Nigeria, you must have gone through things in Canada that would, if a person goes through those experiences, he would have to subject himself to maybe trying to go for healing processes and all that. Does any of those kind of things happen to you?
Like over there, right?
Yeah.
So I think that unfortunately we all are ensconced within history and politics, and we cannot at certain moments escape that, no matter how hard we try. I think first of all, for a minority person, black people are approximately 4% of the Canadian population, and most of those, over 50% of those, live in Ontario. I moved to the Western Canada. I still live in Western Canada. I merely moved from Manitoba to Alberta, both in Western Canada. So those are not, the most diverse in the country, although I should say also that the level of diversity is growing. So I think one experience that stands out for me, I think, would be when I was comment editor of the Manitoba, the official student newspaper of the University of Manitoba. So I was editing on average 6 to 9 pages of this newspaper that was produced every day, not every day, I beg your pardon, every week in the regular semester, and every month, sort of the off season, which would be May to August. We would produce every month, but from September to April, we would go to press every week. And so one of the volunteers, this young man, had contributed several articles I would edit, send it back to him by email and all that, and was visiting the office of the Manitoba, and I had my office somewhere there. I went to a young man who was the managing editor at the time. Again, I was comment editor or political editor. And the guy told him, "Oh, that's the comment editor." And the guest was correcting the guy who was pointed, "Oh, you mean this one?" I said, "No, I mean that one." I thought it was quite interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's that inescapable aspect of it. And as a diasporan, I think that it's an onus. So you do bear a level of responsibility. And when, I always say to friends when in moments of discouragement that, again, pardon me, in the Bible, for instance, especially the Old Testament, wherever you read a passage where God was speaking and was saying, "Fear not, I will be with you, I will go with you, I'll guide," that's an immigrant. Usually that's an immigrant. God has told that person to move from one place to the other. The person has taken it upon his or herself to move from one place to the other. You need the supernatural to be with you. You need the elements
for you to survive.
For you to survive. Because I think human history has clearly demonstrated this animosity for the strange, for the foreign. The reality of it is that if you're from, say, Poland or the US or the UK and you're resident in Nigeria, you have your own experiences, you have your own moments. And in spite of, what has gone on historically. So there is that thing about leaving where you're not from, where you're not a native of. This whole autochthony, this indigeneity, it often comes up. Sometimes it could mean denial of certain opportunities, quite frankly. And at other times, it may be, something that actually helps. But The reality of it is that anyone who's, I guess, sincere about it will tell you that those challenges remain, and those challenges are real. I happen to know folks with whom I was friends in graduate school who don't have a full-time position as we speak, and these are incredibly brilliant individuals.
Well, actually, I wanted to take you back to where you go home, but just before I do that, since you've spoken about folks who have never gotten tenure track positions, I would ask you a quick question. Do you think it's as a result of a subtext of racism, or it's as a result of the competition that they have not been able to build?
So I'll say all of the above. And I say that very carefully. So on the one hand, it's an incredibly competitive environment, such that regardless of who you are, where you come from, it's very difficult to get such full-time positions. Incredibly difficult. And I remember going for an interview, interestingly, in Manitoba. One of my first sets of interviews was in Manitoba. I was invited there just as I was completing my PhD. And I recall one of those I imagine you would have met, Rick Linden, essentially saying to me when we had a one-on-one meeting in his office that all the three of us who were invited for that interview, for this entry-level assistant professor position, all had CVs that they didn't have at their time. That some of them, in fact, only had as they were becoming full professors. That was 2011.
I see.
This is 2019. So the competition is very stiff for
everybody. I think a replica of that also happened in this country. When you look at the first generation professors, full professors, I'm talking about vice chancellors. You look at their CV when they became professors. You realize that a good lecturer one in Nigeria has a better CV than they had at that time. I think it's as a result of the changing times and when there are more of the same thing, then people themselves kind of tighten their belts and become more serious, so that they will always be on top of the competition. Well, let me take you back to this country, Nigeria, the place you go home, a place you say is where you belong to. But I would like you to speak to me about the academia in Nigeria. How do you look at it? How do you compare it with the academia in North America?
Well, that's a profound question. So let me speak with the benefit of having visited Nigeria every year since 2014, and B, having been a Carnegie Fellow at University of Port Harcourt for 3 months in 2015, University of Ibadan 3 months, 2017. Now, what I did notice, especially in those two visitorships that I had, was the lack of resources. I think that was very clear. I recall one of the, and don't get me wrong, I had an amazing time in both places. My welfare was taken very seriously, and I couldn't have asked for more from any of the two universities. And I was in fact humbled by, in some cases, the involvement of the vice chancellors of those two universities while I was there. But we do get struck by the lack of resources. So at one of the classrooms, for instance, there was a day when I was teaching and the light went off. This was 5:30, 6 p.m. It was already getting dark, and they had to turn on the gen of the department. And I was shocked. So the department had its own gen. And some of my students started laughing.
What is shocking about that?
Well, because I did not expect that. I did not expect that. Again, perhaps I'd been away for too long. So that was one. And then and the students, in fact, had a good time laughing. And one of them said, "Oh, there were offices. Some offices had their own generating sets. So some individual faculty members actually bought their own generating sets to make sure their offices were powered." Now that was staggering. If you had to always, I guess, think about that and the fuel and is it going to work, and changing one fuse to the other and all that. Those, I think, take away from precious academic time. As an academic, even if you just sit idly and you're just staring at the ceiling, that is more useful to you than running around to get fuel for the generator set. At least you're thinking, your brain is active, some ideas might pop up in your head, you might maybe type it on your phone or your computer and all of that. So the lower the level of distraction that you have, the better it is in terms of your productivity. And there were instances where some would completely leave their offices because it was too hot. And they couldn't function anymore and had to call it a day because, again, they were unable to meet that power supply. The temperature wasn't favorable and all of that. And I certainly experienced that where I was working on something, but the fan was quite, this was, I think, a UI. The fan was working, there was power supply that day, but the fan could not contain the heat that was being generated. I had to leave the office because I realized I was done mentally. I was spent for that day. So,
I can understand. You came from Manitoba.
Yeah, exactly. So those kinds of challenges, and of course, access to scholarly publications and so on. I'll give you one example. I emailed one of my research assistants, and I have two of them. One PhD, one master's, from May of this year to August. Others may be assigned to me in September, so they alternated sometimes and all of that. But at any given time, you have two or more of such persons. Fielding requests from you. Can you download this particular thing? I gave this one of my researchers just last night a research topic, in basically to find me articles on them and list them in the order of relevance and download the papers and email them to me. And I said, I want a minimum of 20 of such. Those kinds of, so I don't have to spend 4, 5, 6 hours on my own doing that. My time is better spent reading the papers and analyzing and, rather than the heavy lifting that anybody can do. You don't need a PhD to search for articles. This is a first-year master's student at the very top of her game. It's good practice for her. It's good training for her. And I made sure that she wasn't being spoon-fed. And I said, I want you to use your discussion. This is the title. It's a very broad topic, but I want you to use your discussion to get me, first, the most relevant papers, and second, the most contemporary papers. So those are the kinds of, and of course, she's being paid for that. The department is paying her for doing that for me. And she's not the only one doing that. I have another student who is doing that as well. So though you cannot underestimate the significance of such resources, both human and material. I mentioned books earlier, and now we're talking articles. We're also talking about human resources backing up your research. So they make a huge difference so that you can focus on the software component of things rather than just the hardware that anybody can put together. If there's anything lacking, it would be that. The facilities, obviously, could be, I guess, taken a notch higher in terms of not just maintenance. There are cases where they just need to be changed. It's not just maintenance. There's a level where you can clean a toilet bowl and you realize, okay, this is it. It's done. This thing needs to be changed. These things don't last forever. Yes, we talk a lot about maintenance culture or lack of and all, but there are instances where they need to be changed. It's not just being maintained. So I think the maintenance, preventative maintenance in particular, replacing things when they need to be replaced, the libraries, the conditions of the offices, so that people feel happy going to the offices. You're just excited to want to write. And of course, opportunities for professional development, sponsorships, conferences, research grants, and all of that. These are things that ought to be properly instituted in terms of, national conferences, international conferences. All of these are things that universities must do in order to be competitive.
We are actually drawing close to the end, and I still have couple of more questions to ask you, but I will try to summarize them. But first of all, I would like you to speak to me about the quality of research coming from Nigeria, having at the back of your mind the condition you have just described. But what I want you to specifically talk about, it's a little bit different from the generic question of the quality of research of the Nigerian academics. No, I want you to tell me how surprised you are when you see researches of high quality coming from the people that are barely surviving on the condition that you've just described. Do you see some quality coming, and how surprised are you when you see quality?
It's astonishing, and if you've ever been here for any reasonable length of time and you've seen the working environment, then you have a profound appreciation for people who do the work here, and the conditions under which those papers have been produced. And yes, we do receive incredibly impressive papers every now and then. Unfortunately, we can't accept all of those in our journal, but we take some of the very best. But again, I think that academics have to be commended for being able to just even function under that kind of environment. I mean, I've spoken with people who teach 4, 5, 6 classes a term. And still have
5 this time, by the way.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, that's unbelievable when you consider that you also have administrative duties. Just to put it into context, at the University of Alberta, which is a research-intensive university, the normal teaching load, at least for those of us in the Faculty of Arts, is 2 classes per semester. So two in the winter, 2 in the fall. Now, if you have an administrative duty, such as myself, as joint editor-in-chief of a journal, you have a teaching release. So I have a teaching release, 1 teaching release every year for the next 5 years, which is the entire duration of my
responsibility
as an editor, at least in the initial term. Now, what that means is rather than teaching 2-2, I'm doing 2-1 or 1-2. And the idea being that at least that teaching release helps me to focus
more
on the journal and compensate for the time that I'll be spending there. If you're, say, the chair of the department or so, you're probably teaching 1 class a term, quite frankly, if not just 1 a session. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think you would teach more than 1. So, again, it's a question of resources, human power, for instance. Is there anyone else to teach these classes and all of that? So those are areas we need to look into in terms of providing the enabling environment and not overburdening scholars, ensuring that we're demanding from them results that are commensurate with the resources we're providing. So for us, for instance, by the end of June of every year, usually you submit this report, annual evaluation, what you published, what conferences you attended, how many students you supervised, how many students you taught, what classes you taught, and so on and so on. A comprehensive assessment of what you've done. So clearly, I think we could be doing more to support our lecturers and professors.
So towards the end, I would like you to speak to me here in Nigeria about the economy of the academic, of the academia. You've spoken about resources, you've spoken about conferences, about seminars, about all these things. Where do you think the money should come from?
Well, that's a good one, and it's a tough one. Now, of course, depending on who owns the university, I think that's where we should start from. Obviously, if it's a private university, then the involvement of the government would be relatively limited. Although it's not unusual that scholars from such universities are still able to access funding for their research from national bodies that are government-owned. But in terms of running costs, I know, for instance, with respect to the University of Alberta, that it is owned by the province of Alberta, the provincial government. So a certain percentage of our operating costs comes from the government of Alberta. That changes sometimes. Sometimes there are contentions about how much the university should get, how much does the province have to devote to post-secondary education, and whether or not the U of A should take priority over, say, the technical colleges and those dealing with more trades like, occupations and so on. But there's no doubt in the commitment of the province, regardless of the government in power. You can tell that this is important to them. So that's one. The other thing, of course, would be, student fees and so on. Although, of course, increasing school fees of students is never something that goes down well with students. And this may or may not surprise any of the viewers, people of means in society. I am yet to see any serious transgenerational kinds of funding in the stature of Carnegie, in the stature of MacArthur, and all of that. And we have billionaires in this country. We have people who have done well in this country.
What would you say about Dangote Foundation, for example, that is established in a university in Kano?
Oh, well, so I've heard of the Dangote Foundation, but maybe I didn't look deeply into it. But my sense was that they were more focused on humanitarian issues, which is a legitimate and incredibly important area. But yes, I think more of that needs to be established. I think those who are of some means here, and it's not just in the life of the individual. There should be plans for those foundations to continue to operate long after those individuals are gone. Carnegie has long been gone. MacArthur has long been gone. Newton has long been gone. But these are legacies. Killam in Canada. There are 4 Killam universities in Canada, one of which is the University of Alberta. Isaac and Dorothy Killam died a long time ago. But they've got funding that have funding opportunities that have continued to exist long after they died, benefiting people like myself who weren't even born in Canada and would still benefit people who don't even know they'll be applying to the University of Alberta as we speak. So we need to think beyond what we can immediately see and a much more robust, future-oriented kind of approach. And the same thing applies to, every other aspect of daily life, people's businesses and so on. It's not just to feed the family. We should be thinking of actually handing things over to the children. Mm-hmm. This is a company of
future generations.
Exactly. This is family-owned business. And I think such futuristic thinking is what we need. And therefore, I think we need private individuals to step up. The academia in the U.S. thrives, not just because government funds academia in the U.S. It's also because of incredible levels of funding from the private sector.
Then there's this question that I left deliberately at the end. It's not my question, it's the question of the viewers. I know definitely they would want to know. What's your timeline of moving back to Nigeria?
Okay, so that's officially the hardest question you've asked. Thanks to the audience for that. So it's a very tricky one. I would never say never. But I think that having been away for that long, it does make it a little more difficult. I'm also tenured now, as you are aware. And unless there is, I guess, an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in very pragmatic and very practical, policy-oriented ways, I think it's tricky just packing my things and coming back. If all I'm going to do is just return to any regular classroom and all of that, it doesn't make much sense. It would quite honestly be almost a repudiation of all I have worked for over there. I have paid my taxes there for years. I have received tenure there, and you know what the tenure process is like.
Absolutely.
I will be giving away a lot, quite frankly, for that. But the way that I have tried to attenuate that, i.e. the difficulty in simply packing my things and returning, is to be as involved as I can every time I am home. I've mentioned the 2 Carnegie Fellowships, for instance. We did professional development workshops at UI. In fact, I taught 2 courses And there was a third course that was co-taught by myself and 3 others in the faculty, including the then Dean of the Social Sciences at the University of Ibadan. So I had 2 courses that I taught alone, and then the third one that I co-taught with 3 others. So these and some of the students from that particular experience are still very much in touch with me. They email me, I email them, they need advice sometimes. So those are ways I think that we can help. I came to Nigeria via Ghana just last week, and we were there for a workshop, a professional development training workshop. If my memory serves me well, there were at least 10 PhD or 2 PhD students drawn from several countries on the African continent. We interacted over 4 or 5 days, and I got to know them, they got to know me. So those are ways I think we can help without moving here. But nonetheless, I look forward to that day. But it would have to mean that one is able to be of help in a far greater way than we are doing at the moment.
So maybe if I understand you well, it's global coming back, sort of. You're coming back in a global way.
Yes.
So thank you very much for coming to our show today.
Thank you for having me, and I want to sincerely appreciate the viewers for their time, and I want to thank you personally for being such an amazing friend and colleague, and I'm delighted that we were able to meet on this campus today.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.